From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, and real therapists. Do you want free advice? Visit us at podtherapy.net or tweet to us at podtherapyguys to submit your questions to the show. It's episode 4, and we have our first guest ever. So this is awesome. She is a great therapist, talented and personable. Let's hope she doesn't start her own podcast.
Yeah!
And now, broadcasting from Level 9 Studios, that guy's Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tangeman. It's time for some Pod Therapy. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to the show. So we are super excited today.
Yes, pumped.
Yes, we have our first ever
talented
guest.
Therapist. Oh, yeah. A guest. A guest is probably what you were going to say.
Yeah, that too.
I'm glad for that too.
So in the studio today, we have with us Sydney Smith. A little bit about Sydney. She's the founder of RISE, Center for Recovery in Las Vegas. She's a therapist, PhD candidate at Pacifica Graduate Institute, an author, researcher, lecturer, licensed alcohol and drug counselor, licensed professional counselor,
secretly Wonder Woman,
national certified gambling counselor. Okay, well, welcome to the show. I'm exhausted just saying all of that.
You're a busy woman.
That made me sound really good.
You're a very busy person. Yeah. When do you sleep?
Sparingly.
You're a mom too, aren't you?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
2 kids.
2 kids?
Yeah.
Jeez. Okay.
12
so
and almost 9.
And soon to be Nobel Prize recipients, I'm sure. So
yeah, I was feeling good about myself. This is why I like having Sydney around. This is why we're really good friends, is because I start feeling really good about myself.
Yeah.
And then I talk to her and I realize I haven't done anything with my life.
Yeah, that's true. No, I'm actually super duper sad that she's here, because now the listener's going to realize how little we know. Because before they're like, you know what, these guys are the 2 smartest people in the room, and now that's not true anymore. So now it's like, okay, we're gonna wing it.
That was inevitable.
Bring your A game today, Nick.
All right. So before we get started, one of the things that Jim and I wanted to do when we first started this podcast, one of our big things, we wanted to kind of make mental health and addiction more mainstream and kind of pull back the curtains, let people, the average person, get to experience what's actually going on, to kind of take away some of the fear. We had talked about how important it is to have guests on the show, guests with specialty. Guests with specialties, somebody who can bring something to the table that's just really interesting. So when we were talking about this, the first person I thought of was, we got to get Sydney Smith.
Yes. I remember this.
So
first thing you said.
It's very fitting that you are our first guest. So to start with, you're local here in Las Vegas. Can you tell us a little bit about RISE?
So RISE is a comprehensive addiction treatment center, and we have intensive outpatient program, and we work with all addictions, also mental health, depression, anxiety, a lot of the common mental health symptoms. But we have a primary specialty focus in gambling addiction.
Right.
So we work a lot with the gamblers and the family members. And so,
right. And so whenever I think about gambling treatment, you are always the first person I think of, because considering we live in Las Vegas, this city was built on gambling.
Right.
But as far as gambling treatment, it's Sydney. That's what she does. So that's who I think of. I
used to think of Dr. Robert Hunter, but then I know you were with him for a long time, and then you ended up starting your own program.
Yes, I've started the family program for Dr. Hunter, and then I broke away and
there it is.
Built RISE.
Yeah, Hunter's old news.
He's still here, by the way.
He's still here.
Nothing against Dr. Hunter. He's great.
Yeah, he's great. Today's podcast is sponsored by the Problem Gambling Center with Dr. Robert Hunter.
So I know you have kind of an interesting background, kind of an interesting story about how you got interested in gambling. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? What piqued your interest in this?
Well, I'm originally from Oklahoma, and I'm Native American, Cherokee. And so Oklahoma was a non-gaming state. I think the extent of our gambling was bingo. And then in the early 2000s, tribal gaming came in. And so I was already a clinician working in the schools, frontline, and I saw a huge shift, in the people and the problems and the issues that were starting to happen.
awesome.
Yeah. And there's a lot of positive things too, with the economy and gambling brought in, the gaming brought in a lot of positive, aspects to the state. But then, there was no safety net to help all these people that were starting to develop gambling addiction.
And, I want to ask a question about that. So you are a gambling addiction specialist. So you're constantly interacting with people who are experiencing the harms of this. But your curiosity and your interest in this subject really began in Oklahoma when you saw gambling come in. And I hear you saying there were some positives as well. Here you are in Las Vegas. What is your view? I mean, you are a gambling expert. Are you against it? Are you for it? I mean, as an alcohol counselor, sometimes it's like, well, maybe we'd be better off without it. But what do you think about gambling as a concept for society?
I think it's a good question because you're right. A lot of people don't really ask that, or what's your stance on it. But for me personally, I'm neither for nor against gaming. I don't believe it's, either the gambling's fault or the casino, anything like that. I believe, the addiction lives within the person. I think, under the right circumstance, anything can grow, right?
Right.
So I take a neutral stance to gaming.
Okay.
Yeah.
You hear that, Caesars? So sponsor the show.
Completely neutral.
Yeah. Pop Therapy is brought to you by Caesars Entertainment Group.
Well, and one thing that I was going to ask you too, because for us living in Las Vegas, I mean, it's part of our daily life. We can't go to a grocery store without seeing slot machines.
That's
like
right.
they're everywhere, right?
Yep.
And so it becomes very easy to think of addiction taking place here in Las Vegas. But can you tell us a little bit about what gambling addiction is like outside of Las Vegas, outside of Atlantic City? Because this is more than just a casino thing. Like this is all over the United States.
Yeah, so I'll take that question and I'll backtrack just a minute. But, a lot of times you ask people, think about gambling or, gaming, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And they think casino. But yeah, like you're saying, that's not true. Gambling comes in all forms. And it could be, bingo, stock markets, lotto, horse betting in Hawaii, cockfighting is a huge thing, and so, we're talking about online betting, the racetrack. So the extent can be huge, right? So it doesn't have to necessarily mean Las Vegas, gambling. But I think, here Vegas or Nevada in general has the highest prevalence rates of gambling among any other state. So, we have a higher percentage of people that live here and work here that have gambling problems. However, it's the same in all 50 states. Gambling is legalized in 48 of 50 states. Utah and Hawaii are the only two that don't have legalized gaming. But, they get around it by just putting people on the ships, and sending them over the line. Or, a lot of people from Utah will come here. But now that you have online gaming, you can literally, gamble anywhere.
On that note, too, what has been the effect of fantasy football in the gambling world? It seems like it started off as this sort of fun, playful thing. And now when I'm watching commercials and I see fantasy football on there, I'm like, this looks a lot like our casino commercials. And it's like on NFL Sunday. Is that becoming gambling? What do you think about that?
Right. Well, the definition of gambling is anytime you make a wager or a bet where the outcome is unknown. So it doesn't necessarily have to be money. It could be, I've been betting on fantasy sport. Have people relapse that are in recovery on fantasy sports or even on the pull tabs at McDonald's. I want to pop, because it activates something, in the brain.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, or I bet you I can run across the street faster than you.
Wow.
So it can come in different forms, not just, I'm betting a dollar amount on the specific.
Right. Anytime, and again, the definition of gambling is a behavior in which you do not know the outcome. The outcome is unknown, and you're addicted to. Is it like you're addicted to the suspense? Like what is it that becomes addictive about that?
I think there's a lot more studies that can be done. Gambling's relatively new compared to other addictions. It's just gotten the DSM pretty recently in the 5. Insurance now pays for gambling treatment.
Wow.
Although they're a little bit behind times, it's good for the consumer who, normally would be denied services for gambling. And the insurance usually say, well, you don't have a drug or alcohol problem.
Right.
So, we can't pay for your treatment. So they're starting to get on board now, even though they're moving a little slow. So it's good for people who are actually needing help. But, in terms of the addictive factor, it activates a lot of the same stuff in the brain that the other addictions do. It looks very, very similar. And then there's it really affects the impulse control center. It is a disease rooted in impulse control. And so, we see some brain the biology in the brain actually changes as well.
That's amazing.
Even though you're not actually putting anything into your body. So I think that's the misconception is, I'm not ingesting anything. So
it's not a chemical addiction, but a process addiction
Process
is what we
addiction.
call that. So it's similar to maybe sex addiction. Okay, or video game addiction.
Very, very similar. Gaming addiction looks very much like gamblers. I know Nick can attribute to this as well, but you can have a 10-year-old who has a severe gaming addiction that looks like our 65-year-old gamblers. They're suicidal. They the consequences and the symptoms that they're experiencing from it are very, very similar.
Right, and that's one thing that I learned while we went to a training together, right? And one of the things that I thought was really interesting that I'd never really thought about, in terms of what makes gambling addiction different than a substance use addiction. I never really put a whole lot of thought into it, but one thing that I heard was that the suicide is more of an issue because if I'm an alcoholic and I'm doing behaviors that go against my value system and my morals, I can attribute that to my state of mind. I was under the influence. There's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
When you have a gambling addiction and you're doing things outside of your morals, you don't have that excuse to fall back on that, well, I was in an impaired state.
Right.
And so you're kind of left with that guilt. And so that becomes something that can potentially lead to
and much
harming
less understood, right? As well. I mean, alcohol, people go, oh, well, you drink too much. Gambling, a lot of people aren't even aware there is such a thing as gambling addiction.
Right, that's so true. The power of the gambling addiction itself is very underestimated. Even people that are aware. But yeah, many people still don't believe it can actually be a real addiction. And I know in Las Vegas is the first time I heard the term, and I've been in the field for a really long time. But the term degenerate gambler. It's like this very demeaning, kind of demoralizing, and like Nick said. With this disease, there's a lot of shame and guilt that goes into it. A gambler feels shame. I think even the family of the gambler can feel the shame and guilt much more intensely than people who are, suffering from other addictions. There's a different level there.
Is suicidal thinking common in your patients?
Yes. I would say 99.9% of the patients that walk through my door, by the time they walk through, have admitted to having some suicidal thoughts in their past. And the suicide rate among gamblers is higher than even above mental illness, but bipolar and schizophrenia.
Wow.
And so the reality is most gamblers will die before they seek out treatment.
And that's amazing because it's so easy to say, oh, this isn't a disease. This doesn't concern healthcare. Clearly it does. Clearly this is a cause of death if not treated.
Absolutely. Wow. I mean, this is this costs in society, millions and millions of dollars. You look at the mental health, the time off from work, the missing, the embezzlement, sickness. There's even a lot of withdrawal symptoms that come along with gambling. Most people wouldn't believe that's the case as well. And so.
Wow. Yeah. So one of the things that you had mentioned earlier too was the effects on the family. So you had written a book, and it was like a workbook for families, essentially, right?
Yeah, it's meant to be used as a resource guide, kind of a tool.
Right.
Yeah, and interactive.
Which I thought was really funny because just on a personal level, I've known you for several years. And you never mentioned that you were writing a book until
you failed the first test of being an author.
I was writing it in my head.
Yeah. I, on the other hand, have told lots of people all the books that I am writing and have never finished any of them. They're all like in drafts in Gmail. So we're the opposite. You actually accomplish things and don't tell people. I tell people I do things that I did not do.
So with this, can you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that family members of the gambling addict might have and might face?
Right, which was the reason that, I wrote the book, because also I've been personally affected. Like I said, I was in Oklahoma, and I have lived with family members and loved ones that had gambling problems. So I've lived on both sides of the fence, even as a former spouse. And so I feel like I understand, that perspective. And I know even when I was going through it, there was not any help, there was like there was one GA meeting in the state at the time, and this was years ago.
Gamblers Anonymous.
Gamblers Anonymous, yes. And it was like 120 miles away.
Wow.
So, there was, I think, a handful of clinicians in the entire state that was actually even trained in gambling, which is, the other issue of finding, people that's aware, that's working with the addiction, as even therapists in the therapeutic community, because it is treated slightly different than the other addictions. And so writing this book was really important because